You drop out in your second year. Nobody claps. Your mother doesn't speak to you for 4 days, and when she does, it's just to ask if you've thought about what happens when this doesn't work. You don't have an answer. You have a laptop, 40 tutorials bookmarked, and a word you can't stop repeating to yourself at 2 a.m. Matrix. The rat race. The thing you watched your father do for 30 years and retire from too tired to enjoy it. You've decided, at 19, that you'd rather fail at something yours than succeed at something his. You learned video editing the way people learn a language out of desperation. You watch the same transition technique 11 times before your hands understand it without your brain narrating each step. You take an editing job at a small marketing agency, 40 hours a week, modest pay, a manager who doesn't remember your name for the first month. You tell yourself it's temporary. You've been telling yourself that since the second week. At night, you edit for other people. Freelance gigs found in comment sections and cold DMs nobody answers for weeks. Your first client pays you $80 for 11 hours of work. You don't do the math out loud. You already know what it comes to, and it isn't the escape you promised yourself. You start to notice something during your lunch breaks at the agency. Watching your coworkers talk about weekends like they're the only good part of the week. You don't want weekends to be the only good part. You want out of the math where 5 days belong to someone else. You start your own agency the way most people start something they're scared of, quietly and only after work. 2 clients become 5. 5 become 12. You're editing during the day for your job and editing at night for yourself, and there's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't have a name yet, somewhere past tired and before burnout, that becomes your normal operating state. You don't tell your manager. You don't tell most of your friends either. You just don't know how to explain a thing that isn't finished yet without it sounding like a claim you can't back up. There's a night, around month 8, where you sit on the floor of your apartment because the chair felt too far away, and you ask yourself, quietly, whether you're actually building something or just working 2 exhausting jobs and calling one of them a dream. You don't have an answer that night either. You go to sleep anyway. You wake up and keep going, which is its own kind of answer, even if it doesn't feel like one at the time. You quit the agency job at month 11, not triumphantly, quietly, on a Tuesday. In an email you rewrite 4 times because you're both. Your own agency can now support you, barely. You don't tell your mother for 3 weeks. When you do, she asks the same question in a different shape. What happens if this doesn't work? You still don't have an answer. You just have fewer options now, which somehow makes you more resolved, not less. The agency grows. 12 clients become 25. You hire your first editor, someone worse than you were at the start and better than you expect, and paying someone else feels stranger than any client invoice ever did. You've become, without quite noticing the moment it happened, the boss you left behind. Somewhere around month 18, the agency stalls. Not fails, stalls, which is worse in a specific way because failure would at least be a clean signal, and you start to suspect you've built a slightly nicer version of the job you quit, better title, same ceiling, still someone else's clients deciding your Tuesdays. The version of this story people see is the growth chart, not the 18th month, where you sat in your car outside a client meeting for 11 minutes because you didn't have the energy to walk in and perform confidence you didn't feel. You start reading about e-commerce the way you once read about editing, obsessively at 1 a.m., convinced this is the thing that finally breaks the ceiling. You don't know yet if that's insight or just restlessness wearing insight's clothes. You can't always tell those two apart anymore. You use the agency's cash flow to fund a small product line. Not because you've fallen in love with the product, because you've learned, by now, the first 3 months are brutal in a boring, unglamorous way. Bad suppliers, a shipment delayed 6 weeks, an ad campaign that loses money for 11 straight days before you find the angle that works. When it finally clicks, it clicks quietly. No single dramatic moment, just a Tuesday where the math finally tilts positive and stays there. You keep running the agency and the brand at once for almost a year, split across 2 lives that both demand to be the priority. Something has to give, and eventually the agency does. Sold, not shut down, to one of your own former employees for a number that used to sound like a fantasy and now just sounds like a Tuesday afternoon phone call. The brand scales the way things scale once you've already failed enough times to know which mistakes not to repeat twice. 18 months after the sale, the number crosses $10 million. Revenue first, then, slower, something closer to actual wealth once you account for what's left after everything the number costs to maintain. 3 years total. Dropout to 10 million. It's the version of the story that would make a good thumbnail. You know that. You've made enough thumbnails to know exactly which frame this moment would freeze on. But here's what the thumbnail wouldn't show. You still don't sleep past 6. You promised yourself back in year 1 that when you made it, you'd sleep until noon out of pure spite for every alarm clock you'd ever hated. You don't. You wake up at 6 out of habit now, not obligation, and you're not sure there's a meaningful difference between the two anymore. The morning the number crosses 10 million, you're not popping anything. You're sitting at your desk at 6:14 a.m., coffee going cold, opening your laptop the exact same way you have for 1,100 straight mornings. Not because anything's on fire, but because you don't fully know how to not do this anymore. You built this to escape a system where someone else owned your Tuesdays, and for a long moment, staring at the number that used to be the entire point, you realize you never actually left that system. You just became the one holding the clipboard. The alarm's still at 6. The laptop's still the first thing you reach for. The only thing that changed is whose name is on the door. You don't know in that moment whether you escaped the rat race or simply became the fastest rat running it. You close the laptop. You open it again 4 minutes later. Some questions don't get answered. They just get carried, quietly, into the next Tuesday.